Hello, it's week 2, and this is your tiny desk information or lecture for week 2. Won't take up too much of your time today. I think everything's pretty straightforward as you follow along on the Canvas page, but I like to make sure I have a video for you to kind of understand how that we're connecting this and why this is important. I'm really looking forward to your upcoming assignments. We have a nice creative one this week that might take some time, so make sure you make a plan for it. And I'll talk about that a bit as the video goes on. And also, your first team meeting will be coming up shortly. Make sure you contact people when it goes live. You scroll all the way down and you can see all the teams listed at the bottom of the assignment. And I just really love listening to your own dialogue and your own impressions about things. So just follow those instructions. Anything that I'm talking about here, you can make an office appointment. Definitely Mondays and Fridays. I have a lot of time where I'm sitting here in my office at home where I'm available to jump on a Zoom. I've already done that a couple times this term already. So I really looking forward to any more discussions that come my way. Don't be shy. Drop a note and let's jump on. All right. So week 2. This is let me open up our week 2 module so I can make sure I am following along here. But this is where we're going. We don't need roads, famous quote from Back to the Future. Uh, we really are going to focus on storytelling, and it's a tool that we use in all different kinds of areas of study, but it's constructing your message in a very specific form to to engage your audience in complex ideas or complicated ideas or problems that we're having for and that we need solving, or when we need to convey uh, convey that information in a form that is palatable to maybe a non-expert audience. And that happens in all different kinds of ways. Lots of people are using story, and it's a really important branch in the field of communication. It's one of my areas of expertise is storytelling, as I maybe mentioned before in our silly video, this first one of the term that I mention that my bachelor degree is in theater arts, and then for my master's in English and documentary film studies, what I learned how to take science and put them into story form. And how does that help us convey? In fact, I taught a class at Oregon State University for PhD students in water management, and we took their PhD dissertations, which are usually 200 pages, and we converted them into under 10-minute videos to help them have something as a way to convey an idea. So, how do you take something really complex like this and get them TED Talks does that as well, right? TED Talks is a public speaking forum where they ask people who have spent their whole careers and their life and their research, their everything they live and breathe, and they say, we'll give you 18 minutes to talk about it. And that is a big ask for someone who understands things this big to bring them down to a little piece like this. And story is the great way to do that. Now, you're going to, after we finish this module, there's a couple ways you're going to use it. One is I want you to start, when you're reading your book, I really want you to think about how is your author using story to convey really complex ideas. They're usually doing it through character, not characters that are made up, but actually sometimes real life people that this has happened to. I know in Sports Gene uh, by David Epstein that the is that the name? Yep, Sports Gene. He always is doing example after example that is an actual person's experience. So he explains the science and then he talks about an actual person it would apply to. And that's a type of storytelling technique to convey that information in a very individual and specific way. I've posted a few videos in the week 2 module. We talk about Mark Rober. We're going to talk about Neil deGrasse Tyson, Alan Alda, and we have one with a woman who there's a small video about her, and she talks about her experience as a small, like mini documentary about 20 minutes long, and I'll have you analyze that video. She's a radio physicist, astrophysicist, I think is her area. Oh man. But her story is really compelling, and I'm really curious how you would apply this to that. And also, we want to think about kids. How do we get kids interested in science? And kids are often, story is the main conveyor for all sorts of things we try to teach kids, from how to deal with conflict. For those of you taking my conflict class, we do a similar type of thing with kids and books. Here we're doing it with television shows specifically. And so I'll be curious what you um, use for your assignment and how you do that. All right. So there's the things we're looking at this week is this idea of informal science communication. In informal science communication, we're looking at this is anything that's outside the academic or professional settings. We will, the class mostly focuses on informal, but we also deal with professional communication, and we'll do like just a sprinkle of academia and science. But we're really thinking about how information comes out of those fields, and how do we invite non-expert audiences into the information, especially when we talk about public health or other emergency situations. We'll have lots of modules to explore that later on. This is kind of a foundational thing because once we get into this idea of informal science communication, we want to then go straight into story and storytelling and narratives. So how it's not really a hierarchy or a ladder, but I would say that narratives are kind of the umbrella that stories live under. So a narrative is something that has a repeated kind of pattern of belief of what is right and wrong and what are our goals, what are the things we care about, what do we value. Narratives kind of exist in this kind of meta place. And then stories are the things that hold up this umbrella. They're the pillars, and those stories connect us. Okay, so that's a pretty big idea. Let me give you an analogy. When we think about a family has a narrative, and there's all these stories that make up the narrative of a family. The narratives are passed down generation from generation. They are often the things that are repeated at our holidays, around dinner tables, reunions, weddings, funerals, any life events, graduations. Often we hear stories come up again and again in these kind of environments. And over time, those stories, maybe you can think of one, a story that every time this holiday comes up, this story is almost like guaranteed to be told in that moment. That would be what that would be something that starts to form the narrative because of it's repeated. And it usually has a point to it. The point of it is uh, to knowledge, pass down family lore, to for us to learn from the mistakes of others, or to remind people where they came from, that this is where you belong, right? We use story this way. Now we're around the table, we're at the event, whatever it is, and someone starts in on that story. Someone has it down, they down, and you know it too. You can almost say it word for word with them. You know every twist and turn if you've heard it a lot. But then someone chimes in, that's not the way I remember it. Or, oh, you forgot this, that one thing. What happened here? And you get all these kind of little moments kind of poking into the story. And that's when a narrative starts become kind of shared, and it starts to build on itself. So we want to think about their stories that we tell. And then when we start adding in other perspectives, other points of view, we are building a shared narrative. And that becomes very strong. Shared narratives uh, are built of rock, solid rock. They're built of mountains, and they are not easily budged once they have shared structure. Now, okay, I have things to say about that, but let me make sure I'm getting the point of a narrative and how story exists in narrative. Now, let's say we, how do I want to say this? So, if we take this idea of the family and we're creating an analogy to science communication, we got the bridge. We want to get back to science communication. When a scientist comes out with an idea, not an idea. Well, they have a hypothesis, they test it, they form an experiment, and they get results. And then they form a conclusion. And sometimes from that results conclusion, they have a prescription that they need to, that they want to send out, a protocol, a health protocol, or a new policy now that we have this new information. Uh, Other scientists will look at that and they go, oh, that is a great idea. And that's a really important new protocol we need to do. I'm going to read your experiment, your labs, your protocols, and I'm going to pick it up and replicate it in my lab over here. And it could be in a different country or it could be in a different university. We want that. We want a lot of different people picking that up and going, that's an amazing result. I want to try that in my lab. You found out X equals Y. Well, I want to find out if X equals Y as well. Or they're going to go back and go, I did a similar experiment, but I didn't get that conclusion. I wonder why. And that's really the dialogue and hub of science and research. It's a river, it's in flow, it's constantly being discussed and dialogued and repetition. And what happens as we're going down the river of science information, all of a sudden we get a new oar for navigating the river. And we're like, whoa, this new technology is incredible. It's actually helping me understand a concept I couldn't understand before, right? Technology is one of the biggest things that changes how we know what a scientific concept is, even and sometimes you might hear someone say, oh, science, they said that, but just wait. Someone else is going to discover that's wrong, or they're going to change their minds. Yes, because it's a river. It will happen. It is a river. Now, when things become more foundational and solid, and we can get a boulder that is unmovable by the river. That is because those scientists that picked up this experiment and brought it to their lab, they found out X equals Y too when they repeated and replicated the scientific uh, protocols for that experiment in their lab. They go, aha, and then someone else gets it and someone else. Yeah. We need a lot of different people in different labs all over the world with funding from all different kinds of places. And everybody's finding the same results. That's when it becomes like more concrete and solid of a concept. Of course, until we get some new technology and sometimes things can shift and change. But if someone picked up that experiment and they tried to replicate it in their lab, and they go, huh, I read your paper. I followed all your protocols exactly. Here's what I did. I did not come up with X equals Y. And everyone goes, oh my gosh, it can't be repeated or replicated. That puts that first finding on the chopping block. It's not chopped yet, but it's on the chopping block. And then someone else is going to go, okay, we have two different labs from two different countries saying two different things. We're going to need another person to pick it up and see if they replicate it. We need someone else to pick it up. If we getting two different results, and then this lab go, maybe I did something wrong. I'm going to try it again. And then this one goes, oh my gosh, you got a different result. If this scientist and lab is working with ethical protocols, they're going to also try to redo their experiment to see if they get the same result. And this is what happens. This is the dialogue and discussion and the rapids of the river of science. And so when we convey information beyond this academic kind of community where everyone is kind of in the same narratives, you're joining a different narrative when you're trying to convey that information out in the world. That's tough. That can be tough stuff because this narrative out here might be working from a different finding. It might be dealing with corporations that have built profits around a different narrative, and now you're coming in with a new narrative, and now we're going to have a conflict over those things. And often science finds itself in the wheels. It's like being ripped up in the wheels of these grand, big societal narratives, and how will it be ground up and processed out there in the world by courtrooms and legal proceedings, by policy, legislation, precedents, legal precedents before. There's all sorts of things happening. So that means that we really need to pay attention to how these narratives create biases and how frustrating it is in the world of, if you're in the world of science and you know this is repeated and it feels solid, you try and get out in the world and all of a sudden you're like, why is it so hard to get other people to understand? Well, they're working through a different narrative paradigm than the paradigm you've been in in the field of academia. It's often also one of the ways that the outside world will stereotype scientists and academia. They'll say, oh, they are elitists, or there's lots of dismissive terms that is said about that world because there's a disconnect in the narrative paradigms and trying to convey information out there. You can run into a lot of stereotypes and obstacles and hostility. That's usually, and that's what confirmation bias is. So that is one of the things we want to become aware of. And this is the first week, I think, that I'm throwing in confirmation bias, but it's going to come up again and again. So make sure you have a solid understanding of what is a confirmation bias. I'm going to tell you right now. If you just so you're clear on it, but a confirmation bias, well, there's a bias, right? So when you have a bias, it is your tendency based on your worldview, narrative paradigms that you have constructed your life in. And they are usually, biases are almost always running just under our level of awareness. And we'll need some neuroscience out there to help us understand what does it mean to ride just under the level of consciousness, and what does it mean to be under that level of awareness for the way that we are moving through our world. Sometimes we get confronted with our bias, with the choices we make, and someone says, "Ooh, why are you doing that? That sound doesn't seem like it works here." And that would be one way that we might become aware of a bias. A confirmation bias is when something happens that confirms our bias. Ah, I knew it. That's usually the way it goes. Aha, I knew it. I told you all along. I was right. Here's something that happened. I'm going to select this, and it confirms my bias, my worldview, my narrative paradigms, and how all the choices that I've made to move through the world. So we're dealing with ego in a way when we deal with confirmation bias, and we all have ego. It would be very hard to move through the world without this part of the way that we present ourselves and deal with the noise and all the things we have to deal with in the world. We have these, so we have this ego that helps us create our ability to move through the world. Now, so if you want to go after someone's bias, or say that you're doing confirmation bias, uh-oh, that can be really difficult because you're asking someone to give up their narrative paradigm. You're asking someone to give up a bit of their the way they understand themselves and how they understand the world. That's a lot to ask. And it is why it's sometimes so difficult to convince or persuade someone to think about something in a different way and move past their bias. So, confirmation bias. I selected something that agrees with me. I agree with that. But it's also another thing. A confirmation bias is a deselection, it's to ignore or push away or attack anything that would disprove my bias. So I'm going to ignore it, or I'm going to attack it, right? And that's the push. I'm going to attack it. Now I could attack the information itself. Oh, your facts are wrong because I have this little nugget here that proves me right, even if there's a bunch of other ones. Here, I'm going to ignore that and I might attack those facts. However, I could also attack the person behind the message. Oh, yeah, you can't trust the messenger. You can't trust the messenger, let alone obviously their message is wrong. Look who delivered it. So when we think about communication and we're thinking about how we are interacting with information, we want to become aware of our own biases. Scientists have to become aware of their own biases. The public has to become aware. Each as individuals, we are responsible for taking those and try and move them up into a more place of awareness. And that can help us better understand information, how we're getting misinformation, and how to distill these facts. So now you can kind of see why this is coming right after narratives and narrative paradigms. So where's story in all this? Story are all those things we tell that live under that umbrella of those narratives. So what about that? A story is our structured way of understanding. It's a structure. It's a way to organize. So there's lots of ways to organize information. We can organize information chronologically. And story is usually has a chronological order, beginning, middle, end. But we can also organize stories by, or not stories, but information can be organized by topics. It can be organized by cause effect. There's all these different organizational kind of structures and frameworks. And story is can live in there, but it usually has something even more than organization besides a beginning, middle, and hopefully a happy ending or an ending there that we feel good about. We can look at our story as having tone. Okay, so a story needs to have a tone, and a tone is the emotion that runs through the story, whether it is whatever that is. Um, can it be fear, anger, injustice, hope, love? Those things are really important. There's also, doo, 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 doo. Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at the wrong set of notes. There's also character. So, character are the central figures or the central, um, I don't want to say person because we could have often in science, we can make something that we can personify. There's personification of something to give it that character element to put us through the story. So maybe when you were a kid, you watched School of, what is it? Oh my gosh, I can't remember the name. It was the one where they said it's about the finding of America, and it's got a little scroll that's given. It's an animation of a little piece of paper rolled up, and it's the bill. I am a bill. I'm just a bill here on Capitol Hill. So here's an idea where they're using how does a bill become a law by personifying the bill into an actual character that has to move through Congress and Senate, and if lucky one day he'll be turned signed by the President of the United States and become a law. And so that's how a bill becomes a law. What is that called again? Oh well, I'm sure you're saying it right now. I can't hear you. All right. This is why it's sometimes hard to give the lecture on my own. If we were in the classroom, someone would have it, I'm sure of it, and pipe in. Okay, so dun, 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 dun. We have character. The next thing we have tone, character. We're gonna have also this idea of obstacles. What's in our way, what's in our character's way of getting to their goal, to get to the end of the story where everything is roses and lollipops and unicorns and we're all over the rainbow here. There's no place like home. We want that ending on our story. So what are the obstacles? What is our character having to overcome? Now, within the frame, as we watch our character, there might be other characters here or other things that come up that they have to puzzle through and figure out. So, this is something I want you to think about when you're thinking about analyzing something as a story. What is the obstacle as well? Now, I posted on our Canvas page a page called Houston, we have a narrative, and this is from the title of a book by Randy Olson, where he really lays out for science communication to help scientists form stories. And he gives them a really nice, easy formula, the ABT, and, but, therefore. And that's the rhythm a story should go through. Um, so, and, but, therefore, I'm just open the page here, is really about this happens and this happens, but this happens, therefore, and then we get our conclusion. The therefore is now. Some stories are a lot more complex. There's lots of ands, there's lots of buts, but almost all stories pose some type of question that us as an audience go, what's going on? What happened? Right? And there, we don't know, and we don't know, but there's this, therefore, and then we move to the therefore. And usually, right as the therefore, and we're getting the conclusion and we get an answer to that original question, another question pops up. And then the audience is like hooked again. Oh my gosh, we solved that other thing, but now we have another puzzle. And then, but, therefore, and then there's another puzzle. So a good story is going to string along many different puzzles or questions for your audience with all these obstacles that keep coming up again and again. And that's what the string, the link in the chains of stringing to get to that ending. And that is the satisfaction of solving it. So sometimes, just as an analogy to think about your favorite television show. Maybe Stranger Things just came out. I could talk about that. I won't touch season 5 just in case you're still getting through it, but let's get going. Come on, let's talk about Stranger Things. But definitely in season 1, we have Will being taken by the Demogorgon, or the Mind Flayer, whatever, or Vecna. We have Will's disappeared. Will's disappeared. Where's Will? We don't know. But all of a sudden, we think he might still be alive because his mom is getting communication from the upside down. Wait, there's our next question. What's the upside down? How do we communicate with them? She's trying to figure it out. She puts up the Christmas lights with the alphabet. Now we know, if you've gone through all the seasons, you know how it's happening. We've solved all these mysteries. But then new mysteries and new questions pop up. Can you think of that for a TV show you like? They're kind of embedded in there. And then things that aren't scripted, like reality TV, will do this constantly to keep you hooked into the story by who's going to be eliminated or who's going to be murdered or who's going to be voted off the island, right? They're just constant, or who's not going to get the rose. They're constantly creating that question to keep you till the next one. And then we get the characters and those plot points, those ands, those buts, those obstacles. Therefore, and you think you're at the conclusion, but then they give you another question. Okay. So all of that is, I really want you to kind of start looking at story in a completely different way. And can you take note of this when you're watching things? And that keeps people hooked in and hooked in. And when we are looking at science communication and we're looking at what Randy Olson is putting out, he is really helping you try and think about he's really trying to figure out the tools a scientist needs to convey a story. This is also for our communication when we have to communicate a complex topic, how do you keep people keep being hooked into a really long idea, so that they will be continuing wanting to the next piece of information. So it has to have these hooks in it. It's a skill and it takes a lot of time. And I bet some of you in your lives know really good storytellers, maybe in your family or someone who's really successful on their job and they can really hold a room. I wonder if you know anyone like this who really knows how through conversation to fold story in. Now, there's at the below the Houston page, I'm looking at it here. I have a few extra videos. I have one that's about 20 minutes long. I changed astronomy forever. Uh, the title is great. The title is doing exactly what I just said. I changed astronomy forever. He won the Nobel Prize for it. I changed astronomy forever. He won the prize for it. That's that's a great hook just in the title. That's what I want you to start paying attention to. And I want you to figure out there's lots of and, but, therefores that are links and chain through the whole video. There's a lot of them. So think about the overarching and, but, therefore, but can you find those little micro ones that keep the story pulled through? I have a video on this one about confirmation bias, which I discussed. And then I have a longer interview that I really would think it's a great one to engage with because it supports this lecture with talking to Alan Alda about why communicating and science, what is science communication, and he's talking to Neil deGrasse Tyson, so one of our experts on science and story and dialogue and conversation. In the page before that, with more vocabulary, and there's a podcast from SciComm about cosplay, and that will help us in that idea of how do you communicate science to kids? How do you get playful and experiment and fail? And why is failure a component of play and fun? Why do we need to make failure almost our play in science, but for kids? It's a really important concept. I have a couple of articles, one for how I helped bring real science to Breaking Bad. If that's one of your favorite shows, it's definitely one of my favorite ones. Uh, and then I have some videos from that are optional at the bottom of the page. Now, these optional videos are really just for you to practice listening to a science idea being communicated. And these are some of the most expert people on science communication. I've got a video from Mark Rober. I'm letting you know it's really hard to choose. They're all so good. I had a really hard choosing which one to choose from, but this one, there's a lot of kids in it. And since that's kind of the topic of the week, I thought that would be a fun one. Neil deGrasse Tyson talking to his buddy there about why the sky is blue, and they have their podcast, Star Talk, and they are constantly, we have science expert with non-science expert going back and forth, and he's a comedian. It's really fun, and so they're very silly. I usually end up laughing hysterically when I watch those videos. And then I have one, I think it's from Hank Green on explaining caffeine and the chemistry of caffeine. So there's going to be a point where you're going to have to do this, where you're going to have to take a science idea and communicate it to us. So these little videos that I'm sprinkling in here are really to get us going to start thinking about how you might construct something. I can't wait when we get to that, but it's not for a few weeks, so you don't have to worry about it right now. All right, I hope this video helped with your week 2. Have a great week.